Now, as tensions continue in Mozambique, human rights groups are concerned about the possible loss of life. According to Human Rights Watch, at least 10 children have lost their lives, while dozens of others have been injured during the crackdown. For more on this, I'm now joined by Zenaida Machado, a senior researcher at Human Rights Watch. Zenaida, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this afternoon. A very worrying situation out in Mozambique, especially when the life of children is now at risk. What specific human rights concerns do you have, particularly in this situation?
Thank you so much for having me. At this stage, all types of human rights violations. On the side of the people on the streets, we are concerned about their actions. I mean, they have, for example, stopped medical personnel from reaching the hospitals. Hospitals have requested them to open safe routes for their staff so they can attend to the demand. There are a lot of people getting injured, a lot of people getting killed. They will need medical assistance. We are also aware that during these protests, the warehouse of the Ministry of Health has been completely destroyed, meaning that supplies of medicines cannot reach the hospitals. There's also the element of roads being blocked, meaning that those medications cannot be imported. But there is also the element of looting, private property. I mean, a lot of business people have been extremely affected by these events. There are also looting of private houses, destruction of private houses, and the fear that it's been causing on population in general. But there is also a much bigger concern that we have had for several weeks now, which is the conduct of the security forces. And that includes the disproportionate use of force, the excessive use of tear gas, live bullets against unarmed protesters. And that is what has resulted, for example, in the killing of children. You mentioned at least 10, that was a few weeks ago. Yeah. By now that number has increased drastically. We have lost count of how many children have been affected at this stage. But there is also other people that have been killed. Our partners, Platform Decide, are talking about over 250 people killed since the 21st of October, over 500 people injured with live bullets since the same date, and all of those are victims of the excessive force by security forces. But there is also a new element, as you mentioned, the fact that over 1,000 inmates escaped. Yes. A maximum security jail. The treatment of those that were detained or stopped from fleeing. We have strong evidence at this stage, or strong suspicions at this stage, that some of them were executed by security forces when they were caught in the process of trying to flee the jail. So the ill treatment of detainees, prisoners, is also a problem that is emerging now on the side of the security forces.
Speaking of the security forces, I mean, are there mechanisms in place to hold them accountable to some of the atrocities that you make mention of?
I keep wondering that question myself, because we have been calling for that accountability to happen. And I think it's important also to remind the public, why is it important for that accountability takes place as events like that are happening on the streets? It's so that every single official that is deployed on the streets will know that if they behave in a manner that is against the law, in a manner that is against the basic principles of human rights, they will be severely punished. What we haven't seen from the Mozambican authorities is willingness to even investigate the abuses that we have been exposing and documenting, which leads us at times to believe that this is state-sponsored abuse of protesters. The security forces have been trying to justify their actions by saying that these protesters are nowhere closer to peaceful that there are violent protests and that security forces have used the level of force that was needed to counter that violence. We disagree with them. We agree in one point that indeed they were focus of violence, and this week in particular has been very violent. But the fact that some people within a protest movement have turned violent does not brand the entire movement violent.
Yeah.
This protest began largely peaceful. It was the way security forces responded to it that has made it escalate to the stage that we are now. And yes, of course, at this stage, we want to call on Mozambican authorities to reconsider their position, go back to their obligations, national and international, investigate the conduct of security forces, take to court those that have acted wrongly and against the law, and provide some redress to the victims. Over 250 people killed, over 500 people injured. Some of them will never be able to walk, will never be able to go back to their jobs and make an earning for their families. They deserve some sort of redress for what happened to them.
Lastly, Zenaida, what role do you think the international community should be playing at this point? I mean, we saw South Africa and its interventions a few weeks ago, but do you think it's enough, especially within the region?
I think at this stage we want to continue to encourage South Africa to continue to push for peaceful solutions to this problem. We wish they had started earlier. We also want to ask them to engage with the entire Mozambican society, not only with the Mozambican government. They should create mechanisms that allow civil society, the victims of these atrocities that we have seen, to engage with South Africa, not only with South African government, but also with the regional bodies like SADC and African Union. And I think South Africa can also push for the SADC to take a decisive position and move towards finding a solution for the Mozambican problem. We wish they had started earlier, like I said, but what they have been doing recently is worth encouraging and urging them to step up on their game before anybody else is killed on the streets of Mozambique.
Yeah. All right, Zenaida, thank you so much for your time. Certainly very worrying what's coming out of Mozambique, and we do hope, like you say, that the international communities will be able to rally up and ensure that these protests are peaceful going forward. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. That was Zenaida Machado, who is a senior researcher at Human Rights Watch.